On the night of December 24th, 1945, winter had settled over the mountains of West Virginia with the kind of cold that seemed to quiet everything it touched. Frost covered the ground around Fayetteville. The roads were dark, the hills disappeared into the night, and along a rural stretch north of town stood the large timber-framed home of George and Jennie Sodder, a house filled with the noise and movement of a family far too large for silence to last very long. 10 children belonged to the household. On that Christmas Eve, some were preparing for bed, some were still awake, and some were thinking about the morning ahead. There were gifts in the house. There were chores to finish. There were ordinary family conversations taking place in rooms that, within hours, would no longer exist. By sunrise, the house would be gone. 5 of the Sodder children would be missing, and no confirmed remains would ever be found. That single fact would transform what might otherwise have been remembered as a terrible house fire into one of the most enduring disappearance mysteries in American history. The official explanation was straightforward. The children had been trapped upstairs when the house burned, and the intensity of the fire had destroyed their bodies. But to George and Jennie Sodder, the explanation never answered the questions that followed. They believed the circumstances surrounding the fire suggested something else, something deliberate, something that may have begun before the flames ever reached the house. The difference between those possibilities became the center of their lives. If the children had died in the fire, then the Sodders had suffered an unimaginable loss. But if they had been taken, then somewhere beyond the ruins of the house, 5 children might still have been alive. That possibility, however unlikely it seemed to others, was enough to keep their parents searching for decades. George Sodder had been born Giorgio Soddu in Sardinia in 1895. He reportedly came to the United States as a young teenager, crossing the Atlantic alone at approximately 13 years of age. Like many immigrants of his generation, he entered a country where survival depended on work, persistence, and the willingness to begin again. He worked around railroads and hauled water for railroad crews before eventually making his way to West Virginia, where the coal country offered both opportunity and hardship. There, he built a life. He married Jennie Cipriani, the daughter of Italian immigrants, and together they raised a large family. George eventually operated a trucking business, and the Sodder home became the kind of place where life was constantly in motion. Children moved through the rooms, work began early and ended late. Arguments could be followed by laughter. The house was crowded, active, and familiar to the people who lived around it. But George Sodder was also outspoken. He had strong political opinions, and he was openly opposed to Benito Mussolini and Italian fascism. To George, the politics of Italy were not merely distant events unfolding across an ocean. They were connected to the country he had left, to his identity, and to the community around him. According to later family accounts, his criticism of Mussolini created tensions with some members of the local Italian-American community. By Christmas Eve of 1945, Mussolini was dead. The war in Europe had ended months earlier. American families were beginning to move toward a sense of normality after years of rationing, military service, separation, and uncertainty. Christmas was meant to be a time of family reunion. For the Sodders, it would become the beginning of a mystery that would outlive nearly everyone who had been there. In the months before the fire, the family later recalled several events that, viewed separately, might have seemed insignificant. Together, after the disappearance, they became something else entirely. One account involved an insurance salesman who had visited the Sodder home. George reportedly refused to purchase a policy, and the conversation allegedly became heated when the subject of his outspoken political views arose. According to the family's later recollections, the salesman made a disturbing statement warning that the house would one day go up in smoke and that the children would suffer for George's words. The precise wording of the alleged threat cannot be independently established with certainty. No recording exists, no complete contemporaneous transcript preserves the conversation. and the story became especially important only after the fire. That does not mean the family invented it. It means that, like all memories revisited after catastrophe, it must be considered within the limitations of human recollection. Another stranger reportedly visited the property around the same period and examined the exterior of the house, paying particular attention to the fuse boxes. He allegedly warned the family that the boxes would one day cause a fire. The Sodders reportedly believed the electrical system had already been inspected in connection with the installation of a new stove and had been considered safe. Then there were reports of a vehicle parked along the road near the family home. The older Sodder boys later recalled seeing people inside who appeared to be watching the younger children as they walked home from school. No license plate was recorded, no driver was identified. The behavior may have been innocent. It may have been suspicious. At the time, no one had a reason to know which. That is the difficulty with warnings. Before a tragedy, they often look like ordinary events. Only afterward do they seem to form a pattern. On the evening of December 24th, the Sodder house was full. 19-year-old Marion had returned from work with small gifts for her younger sisters. The children wanted to stay awake. Jennie allowed them to remain up later than usual. 14-year-old Maurice and 9-year-old Louis were expected to finish some work before going to bed. George had already gone upstairs. John and George Jr. were home. The youngest child, 3-year-old Sylvia, was still in the house. The family was preparing for Christmas in the most ordinary way possible. And then, sometime after midnight, the ordinary sequence of the night began to break apart. At approximately 12:30 in the morning, the telephone rang. Jennie went downstairs to answer it. A woman on the other end asked for someone who did not live in the house. Jennie did not recognize the voice. Behind it, she believed she could hear laughter, perhaps the sound of glasses clinking, as though a gathering or party were taking place somewhere nearby. She told the woman she had the wrong number and hung up. Before returning upstairs, Jennie noticed that the lights were still on and the curtains had not been drawn. She assumed the younger children had taken care of neither. She closed the curtains, turned off the lights, and returned to bed. Around 1 o'clock, she woke again. This time, there was a sound above her. A heavy thud struck the roof. Then came what she described as a rolling sound across the surface overhead. The noise was never conclusively explained. It may have been an object. It may have been debris. It may have been something unrelated to the fire. But in the years that followed, the sound would become one of the details the family returned to repeatedly. Jennie eventually fell asleep again. Roughly half an hour later, she woke to the smell of smoke. The house was burning. The fire appeared to be concentrated near the room George used as an office, close to the telephone line and one of the fuse boxes. Whether that location was the true point of origin would later become one of the central disputes surrounding the case. In those first moments, however, there was no time for investigation. There was only the instinct to escape. George and Jennie got outside. Marion escaped. So did Sylvia, John, and George Jr. But 5 children were still missing. Maurice, Martha, Louis, 8-year-old Jennie, and 5-year-old Betty. They were believed to be upstairs. The staircase was already burning. George tried to get back inside. He attempted to climb toward a window and broke the glass, cutting his arm in the process. But the smoke and flames made the interior nearly impossible to navigate. The staircase had become inaccessible, and the upper floor was rapidly filling with heat. Then George looked for the ladder normally kept near the house. It was gone. The family later found it down an embankment, approximately 75 feet from where it had reportedly been stored. If someone had deliberately moved it, the act could have prevented George from reaching the second floor, but no one ever conclusively established who moved the ladder, or exactly when. George then tried to use one of his trucks to gain height. Neither vehicle would start. According to the family, both trucks had been functioning normally. To George, the simultaneous failure seemed suspicious. Another explanation was later proposed. In the panic of the moment, repeated attempts to start the vehicles may have flooded the engines. Both explanations were possible. Neither was conclusively proven. The water barrel outside was frozen. The telephone was dead. The family attempted to call for help, but their first efforts failed. A neighbor's telephone was used. Another call reportedly reached a tavern, only to find that the telephone there was unusable. Eventually, a call reached the fire department, But this was 1945. The local department relied heavily on volunteers, and wartime service had reduced the number of men available to respond. Firefighters had to be gathered. The distance had to be covered. While the family waited, the house continued to burn. The people who had escaped could do nothing but watch. Within roughly an hour, the structure had collapsed. By the time firefighters arrived, there was little left of the home, and the 5 children were gone. The official explanation developed quickly. The children had been inside. The house had burned. Therefore, the children had died. But when the debris was examined, the Sodders expected to find remains. They did not find what they expected. There were no clearly identifiable bodies, no complete skeletons, no remains that could conclusively be assigned to the 5 missing children. Fire Chief F.J. Maurice reportedly concluded that the fire had burned hot enough to consume them. But the initial search was brief, and the debris was not examined using the kind of systematic recovery methods that would be expected in a modern forensic investigation. The house had collapsed into a mixture of burned timber, ash, household material, and debris. The fire had altered the scene. The investigation took place in 1945, decades before many modern fire scene techniques were developed. That does not prove the children survived, but it leaves an important question. Was the debris searched thoroughly enough to establish that no remains were present? The Sodder family believed the answer was no. Jennie reportedly conducted her own experiments with animal bones, attempting to understand what a fire could destroy. To her, the results strengthened her belief that 5 children should have left some physical evidence behind. The comparison, however, was imperfect. A house fire is not a controlled cremation. Temperatures vary throughout a burning structure. Oxygen levels change. The location of a body matters. The duration of exposure matters. A collapsing building can scatter and bury material. It is scientifically possible for a fire to severely damage human remains. But the absence of remains does not automatically prove that 5 bodies were completely incinerated, and the Sodder case never received the kind of forensic examination that could definitively settle that question. The family's distrust deepened during the coroner's investigation. According to later accounts, a man connected to the insurance business was part of the coroner's jury. The family believed this man may have been the same insurance salesman who had previously threatened George. If that identification were accurate, it would represent a serious conflict of interest, but the exact identity and circumstances have remained debated. The family nevertheless believed the investigation had been compromised. The conclusion that the fire was accidental, possibly caused by faulty electrical wiring, did not satisfy George. The lights in the house had remained on during the fire. To him, this seemed inconsistent with the electrical explanation. Whether it truly was inconsistent is another question, but the family's suspicion had already begun to harden. Then came the telephone line. After the fire, the Sodders reportedly discovered that the line had been cut. A repairman allegedly determined that it had not simply burned through. It appeared to have been severed, and the cut was approximately 14 feet above the ground. Someone would have needed to climb or reach that height. The family believed the line had been deliberately cut to prevent them from calling for help. A man later associated with theft from the property reportedly admitted cutting a line that night, claiming he had mistaken it for a power line, but the details surrounding that account remained unclear. Why would a thief cut the line? Why was it cut at that height? And how did the act relate to the fire? The evidence did not provide a definitive answer, but the severed telephone line became one of the strongest pieces of circumstantial evidence supporting the family's belief that the fire had been deliberately set. The missing ladder raised a similar question. It had reportedly been kept near the house. During the fire, it could not be found. Later, it was discovered down an embankment. The family believed someone had moved it deliberately. The alternative explanation was that it had been knocked or displaced during the chaos. But whatever had happened, the consequence was the same. George could not use it to reach the upper floor. The trucks presented another uncertainty. They had reportedly been functioning, yet neither would start during the fire. To George, this suggested sabotage. The mechanical explanation involving flooded engines remained plausible, and so the trucks, like the ladder and the telephone line, remained suspended between suspicion and coincidence. Months after the fire, when the snow had melted, the youngest surviving daughter, Sylvia, reportedly found a small dark green object in the brush near the property. It was described as rubber-like. George connected it to the heavy thud Jennie had heard on the roof. The family wondered whether it might have been associated with an incendiary device. Perhaps something had been thrown onto the roof. Perhaps the sound had been caused by an object designed to start the fire. But the object was never conclusively identified as a firebomb. It was never proven to have caused the fire. Its significance remained uncertain. A bus driver reportedly told investigators that he had seen what appeared to be balls of fire near the Sodder home. The account was later interpreted as possible evidence that burning objects had been thrown toward the house. But a witness observing a fire at night may interpret unusual flames in many ways. Burning debris can appear to move through the air. Electrical phenomena can be misunderstood. And memories can change when later events give earlier observations new meaning. The account was significant. It was not conclusive. Then came one of the strangest stories in the case. According to later accounts, a human organ was allegedly found among the ruins. The organ was reportedly placed in a container and buried. Years later, George and investigator C.C. Tinsley allegedly dug up the container, and a funeral director examined what was inside. The material was identified as fresh beef liver, not human tissue, apparently not burned. The story later took an even more extraordinary turn. Some accounts suggested that Chief Maurice had planted the liver, perhaps to convince the family that the children had died and to bring the investigation to an end. That claim has never been conclusively established, but the story deepened the Sodders' belief that authorities had been more interested in closing the case than solving it. The testimony of the surviving family members also became part of the controversy. John Sodder's account in particular was later described differently in different versions. In one telling, he was said to have climbed the stairs or attempted to reach the upper floor. In another, he was described as shouting toward the children from below. The difference may appear significant, but the circumstances must be considered. John was a young man inside a burning house. The event was traumatic. His recollection was recorded after the fact, and memories formed during extreme danger can become fragmented. A person may remember what he did while later describing the exact sequence differently. That does not make the testimony meaningless, but it does make every discrepancy difficult to interpret. The Sodder case would eventually become a collection of memories repeatedly revisited over decades. Some details remained stable, others changed, and every change became another source of doubt. In 1949, 4 years after the fire, an excavation was conducted at the site. The search recovered various objects, including small bone fragments. The fragments were sent for examination by the Smithsonian Institution, where anthropologist Marshall T. Newman examined them. The conclusion was significant. The fragments were human vertebrae from a single individual, estimated to have been approximately 16 to 22 years old. That was older than any of the 5 missing Sodder children. The fragments also reportedly showed no clear evidence of exposure to fire. Newman concluded that they most likely originated in filled dirt used at the site, rather than belonging to the missing children. This did not prove that the children had survived, but it failed to provide the evidence the family needed to accept that they had died in the fire, and it raised another question: where had the bones come from? The explanation involving filled dirt was possible, but it could not give the family the certainty they wanted. Once again, the investigation ended not with an answer, but with another unresolved question. The Sodders contacted the FBI. George wrote to J. Edgar Hoover, who reportedly replied that the case fell outside federal jurisdiction unless local authorities requested assistance. The family continued searching on its own. They followed reports of sightings, they traveled, they examined photographs, they investigated rumors that appeared from different parts of the country. One reported sighting placed children resembling the missing siblings at a rest stop between Fayetteville and Charleston. A woman reportedly claimed she had served breakfast to children who looked like the Sodder children. The vehicle was said to have carried Florida license plates. If true, the sighting would have occurred after the fire, but the children were never conclusively identified. Another account involved a woman named Ida Crutchfield, who reportedly claimed that 5 children had arrived at a hotel in Charleston with Italian-speaking adults. The adults allegedly became hostile or evasive when questioned. The story was compelling, but its reliability was questioned. Crutchfield reportedly did not see photographs of the missing children until years later. That creates a serious problem. A witness may honestly believe that a later photograph resembles someone seen in the past, but resemblance is not identification. And the longer the gap between an event and a testimony, the more difficult it becomes to verify what was actually seen. In 1952, the Sodders made their search impossible to ignore. They placed photographs of the missing children on billboards. 5 faces looked out at passing motorists. 5 children, 5 photographs, 1 unanswered question: what had happened to them? The billboards remained for years. The children stayed young. The parents grew older. The world changed around them, but the photographs did not. For the Sodders, the message was simple. They did not believe the children should be declared dead without proof. Then, in 1967, more than 2 decades after the fire, a photograph arrived from Kentucky. It showed an adult man. The family believed he resembled Louis. By then, Louis would have been a grown man. The face in the photograph appeared to contain features the family remembered. The resemblance was powerful, but resemblance is not identity. On the back of the photograph was a cryptic message containing a name, a reference to a brother, and a sequence of letters or numbers that has never been satisfactorily explained. The family hired an investigator to pursue the lead. The investigator reportedly traveled to investigate. Then contact was lost. Whether that disappearance had anything to do with the Sodder case is unknown. But to the family, the event was deeply disturbing. The photograph became one of the final great possibilities that kept the mystery alive. The years continued. More sightings arrived. Some were anonymous. Some came from people who believed they recognized the children. Some involved photographs. Some involved strangers claiming knowledge of the family. Most ended in disappointment. The problem was that every lead contained 2 possibilities. It could be the answer, or it could be another false hope. For the Sodders, uncertainty became a form of imprisonment. Death is devastating, but disappearance leaves the door open. A child may be somewhere. A child may have grown up. A child may be living under another name. Every possibility carries hope, and every failed lead carries another loss. By the late 1960s, George Sodder had spent more than 2 decades searching. He had followed rumors, written letters, examined photographs, and traveled across state lines. He never learned what had happened to his children. He died in 1969. Jennie continued. She wore black for years. For her, mourning never truly ended. The billboard remained and the photographs continued to face the road. Eventually, Jennie died in 1989. After her death, the family finally took the billboard down. The faces disappeared from the roadside, but the mystery remained. The youngest surviving daughter, Sylvia, continued to preserve the family's belief that the children had survived. She carried the story into another generation, preserving the questions that had defined her family for most of her life. Sylvia died in 2021. By then, almost everyone who had personally experienced the night of the fire was gone. The house had disappeared. The original investigators were gone. Many witnesses were gone. The physical scene had changed beyond recognition. What remained were documents, photographs, memories, reports, and the absence of 5 children. The Sodder case is difficult because it contains 2 different kinds of truth. There is the truth of memory. George and Jennie believed their children had survived. They spent decades searching. Their conviction was genuine. Their grief was real. Their suspicions were not invented simply for attention. But sincere belief is not the same as physical proof. The human mind is especially vulnerable to uncertainty. When a tragedy occurs, memory does not remain untouched. It is revisited, discussed, reconstructed, connected to later information. A strange event that once seemed meaningless can become suspicious after disaster. A witness may remember something correctly but place it at the wrong time. A family may remember a conversation differently from an investigator. None of this means people are lying. It means memory is not evidence in the same way physical material is evidence, and the Sodder case contains very little physical evidence capable of providing a definitive answer. There is no confirmed grave, no confirmed body, no confirmed kidnapping vehicle, no verified photograph proving that an adult Louis Sodder existed under another name, no confession, no identified abductor, no definitive forensic reconstruction of the fire. The case, therefore, remains suspended between two possibilities. The first is that the children died in the fire. A fast-moving blaze destroyed the home. The initial search was inadequate. The remains were destroyed, scattered, or overlooked. The family could not accept the lack of physical evidence, and over time, suspicion transformed into certainty. The second possibility is that the fire was deliberately set. The children were removed. The fire destroyed the evidence. The strange calls, the missing ladder, the severed telephone line, the failed trucks, the alleged threats, the sounds on the roof, and the later sightings were not coincidences but fragments of a larger crime. But that theory has its own problem. Where is the definitive evidence? Who took 5 children from the home? How were they removed without leaving a verified trail? Where did they go? Why was no confirmed identity ever found? The mystery survives because neither explanation completely satisfies every question. On Christmas Eve, 1945, 5 children went to sleep in a family home outside Fayetteville, West Virginia. By morning, the home was gone. Maurice, Martha, Louis, Jennie, Betty. They were never conclusively found. The fire may have destroyed them. The investigation may have failed to recover what remained. The passage of time may have erased the evidence forever. Or the fire may have been something else entirely, a deliberate act, a distraction, a crime hidden inside a tragedy. The evidence cannot prove that the children were abducted, but the absence of remains prevented the family from accepting that they died. And so the Sodders lived for decades between grief and hope. George died in 1969. Jennie wore black until her death in 1989, after which the famous billboard finally came down. Sylvia carried the family's belief forward until her death in 2021. The people who once stood outside that burning house are now gone. The house itself is gone. The voices of the original witnesses have fallen silent. And the children, if they died that night, have no confirmed grave. If they survived, no confirmed identity, which leaves the mystery where it began, in the darkness before Christmas morning, in the space between what the fire destroyed and what it left behind. The question is not simply whether 5 children disappeared. The question is whether they disappeared because the flames took them, or because someone took them before the flames ever could. Did 5 lives end inside a burning house, within calling distance of their parents? Or were 5 children carried into the darkness before the fire could ever reach them? More than 80 years later, the answer remains hidden somewhere between the ashes of a vanished home and the memories of a family that never stopped looking.